Pick your poison: abortion, euthanasia, battered wives and children, shootings in schools, genocide, bombers, riots in the streets, road rage. I mean, violence is flooding our streets, it's flooding our neighborhoods, and yet we're supposed to believe, in spite of all that we see with our naked eye, all the headlines we read in the paper, we're supposed to believe, but there's a God in heaven.
Hope and encouragement for life.
Probably tell our team's done a great job on the set. We're calling this series On the Ropes, because whenever a boxer or a wrestler is on the ropes, it means they're in big trouble. Their strength is waning. They might lose the match. And if you've walked in today and you've ever at some point in your life struggled with your faith or struggled with God, or maybe you walked in and you're really having a hard time that God really cares, that God's even listening, that God's even involved. If you're even wondering, really, is God really even good? This book's for you. This series is for you. Habakkuk is basically wrestling with one question. And you're going to find it's a question that caused him sleepless nights, loss of appetite, unbelievable depression, deep discouragement. Because Habakkuk is looking at a world that is literally collapsing around him. It's a world unbelievably like the one we're living in right now, where it seems like everything not nailed down is coming apart. It seems like the bad guys win a lot more than the good guys. It seems like the naughty and the nasty seems to get victory over the neat and the nice. And he's wrestling with this one question, and it's literally tearing his guts out. And here's the question he's wrestling with. If God is good, and God is in control, why is the world the way it is? And as we begin this incredible journey with a great man who encountered a great question and won a great struggle 2,500 years ago, here's the key thing that we're going to learn this morning. This is what I want you to take out the door and you walk out the door. When we don't understand what God is doing, we need to remember who God is. When we don't understand what God is doing, we need to remember who God is. Now, there's a lot to learn on how to deal with doubt. How do you handle those fist-shaking moments that come into your life? And we're going to learn from the first few words how to begin to win your match with God. Now, he just gives us two things to do as we start off on this message. So I'm going to give you a break. Usually I give you 3 or 4. I'm going to give you 2 today, all right? So you're here this morning and you say, man, I need to hear this. Can I be honest with you? I'm ticked off at God. I am royally ticked off at God. I am mad at God. I'm bitter at God. I'm upset with God. I asked God to come through and He didn't. I asked God to do something, He didn't. I prayed and I don't feel like God heard my prayer. You're doggone right. I am royally ticked off at God. Let me tell you the first thing then you need to do. Ready? Write this down. Honestly confront God. Just honestly confront God. Now listen what Habakkuk does in verse 1. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? This is what's really upsetting him. How long must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Now, let me give you a quick historical background of when Habakkuk was written, because that's important to the whole storyline. The 2 greatest kings that Israel ever had, somebody tell me, who were they? Who were the 2 greatest kings Israel ever had? David and Solomon. All right, the 2 greatest kings Israel had was David and Solomon. It was under their reign that Israel became the world's #1 superpower. As a matter of fact, they were so right with God and God was so right with them, they were literally invincible. They conquered everybody and everything. I mean, the money was rolling in. Everything was coming up. Roses and chocolate and apple pie. And everything was absolutely great. And then decay and decline set in when Solomon's heart began to leave the Lord. He disobeyed God. He started marrying pagan wives. He started building pagan temples. Israel's heart was turned away from God. And after Solomon died, there was a civil war for control of the kingdom. And the kingdom actually split up into 2 countries, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. Well, eventually, Israel went so far to the left, they went so far against God, that they were taken captive by the Assyrians, and now only Judah was left. For a time, God spared Judah. And even under a good king named Josiah, he brought revival and reform to the nation, but it didn't last very long. The revival didn't really take, and Judah once again had turned to paganism and idolatry. They disregarded God's word, they disobeyed God's law, and that's the situation Habakkuk is in. He's looking at a country that is spiritually and morally and ethically falling apart. So he begins to pray. And he says, God, I want you to do something. I want you to intervene. I want you to break in. My people are acting like pigs. My people are acting like dogs. My people are acting like smut. And I'm sick of it. And I know you got to be sick of it. And I want you to do something about it. And this is what makes Habakkuk such a different kind of prophet from every other prophet in the Old Testament. Because every other prophet that you read, they're confronting the people on God's behalf. Not this prophet. He's confronting God on the people's behalf. He's saying, why don't you do something? I know you can't like what's going on if I don't like what's going on. And now what he basically said is, what's really ticking me off now is not their iniquity, it's your indifference. I pray, I fast, I beg, I call, I implore. And it's almost like he's saying, I know you're not dead, but are you deaf? Can you clean your ears out? I mean, if you've ever, listen, have you ever had this experience? You pray about something, and you pray hard, and you pray long. And you not only pray about something, to you, it is a no-brainer for God to give this request. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. You say, you know, if I was God, I would gladly do this. And you pray and you pray and you pray, and you get no response. You say, yeah, I've been there. That's exactly what Habakkuk was going through. For example, you prayed for the baby to live, but the baby died. You prayed for your marriage to make it, but the marriage didn't make it. You prayed for the tumor not to be cancerous, but it was terminal. You prayed for bad things to become good, but instead they got worse. And you're sick and tired of dialing up God on your prayer phone only to hear these words, sorry, this number has been disconnected. And it's not just God's indifference that is ripping Habakkuk's heart out of his chest. It is his seeming inaction. Listen again to verse 2. I cry out to you violence, but you don't save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There's strife, conflict abounds. The law is paralyzed. Justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. I mean, Habakkuk is looking at a culture and a country that is literally disintegrating before his very eyes. And he basically says, look, people are messed up. Culture is messed up. Families are messed up. Systems are messed up. You got children that don't have dads. You got policemen that don't enforce the law. You got attorneys that are not out for justice, they're out for bucks. You've got judges that don't care about what's right, they care about power. You've got elected officials lining their pockets with gain and they don't care about the people under them. You've got the innocent getting shafted while the guilty go free. If you do the right thing, you get sued. If you do the wrong thing, you get away with it. You say, man, that sounds like us. It really does. Matter of fact, you'll notice he uses the word violence twice. And would anybody disagree with me that we're living in an increasingly violent society and an increasingly violent world, an increasingly violent nation? Pick your poison. Abortion, euthanasia, battered wives and children, shootings in schools, genocide, bombers, riots in the streets, road rage. I mean, violence is flooding our streets, it's flooding our neighborhoods, and yet we're supposed to believe, in spite of all that we see with our naked eye, all the headlines we read in the paper, we're supposed to believe, but there's a God in heaven, and He's good, and He's powerful, and let's just call it what it is. That just doesn't compute. It didn't compute to Habakkuk. And there are times it hasn't computed to me. And there are times it hadn't computed to you. When you hit the wall with God, and you will, you give your faith enough time, your faith will hit the wall. You give your life enough time, you will hit the wall with God. There are going to be times you're going to wrestle with your faith, you're going to wrestle with the God of your faith, you're going to literally be on the ropes. And when you do, you will do one of three things. I want you to write these down. You will do one of these three things, and only one of them is right. But I promise you, you will do one of these three things. When you finally come to that, I can't take it any more moments, you'll do one of three things. Some people will check out. There's a couple right now I know started coming to this church almost 7 years ago. They've hit a real rough spot in their life. They've hit a tough spot in their finances, hit a tough spot in their marriage. The engine of their life is sputtering. It's not hitting on all 8 cylinders. And do you know what they've done? Completely dropped out of church. I've called this man on numerous occasions. I've done everything I know to minister to him, done everything I know to try to get them back. Gone. At the time when they ought to be in church more than they should have ever been in church in their life, they checked out. That's what some of you will be tempted to just check out. And then other people, they'll back out. They'll just walk away from God altogether. They'll say, I knew this God thing didn't work. I knew this wasn't me. I knew this wasn't real. I knew this whole business about God was just religious superstition, because if God is who he says he is, this world would not be the way it is. Now, I just want to tell you right up front, either one of those responses are futile, and they're both fatal. And if you take either one of those responses, you will automatically forfeit your match. You say, okay, well, if I don't back out and I don't check out, what's left? Talk it out. Talk it out. See, on the one hand, Habakkuk doesn't hit the panic button and say, well, evidently there's no hope. On the other hand, he doesn't hit the snooze button and say, well, there really isn't a problem. He doesn't pretend with God. He doesn't pout with God. He wrestles with God. He gets in the ring. He puts on the gloves. He says, okay, let's go toe to toe. So let me ask you a question right now. Don't raise your hand, but I'm really interested. Anybody in this room right now, if I were to ask and you were to be honest with me, are you frustrated with God? Are you questioning God this morning? Yeah, I really am. Well, go ahead and question him. He already knows you got questions. And let me just tell you something. Let me defend God here just for a moment. God can handle your questions. God can handle your frustrations. God can handle your doubts. And this is Habakkuk's first prayer. But now we come to God's first answer. Now I want you to write something else down. This is important. God always answers prayer. By the way, newsflash, no is an answer. That'd be a good thing for you, some of you parents, to teach your little kids. No is an answer. So just because God says no doesn't mean he doesn't answer. He always answers prayer. He may not always answer it in the way you would like, and he may answer sometimes in a way you can't even hear it. But he always answers prayer. Now, God's answer is absolutely amazing. You ready? Look in verse 5. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you wouldn't believe even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves. They promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build ramps and capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Now what's this last statement? Guilty men whose own strength is their God. Now in effect, this is kind of funny. What God says to Habakkuk basically is this. You think things are bad now? Habakkuk, you ain't seen nothing yet. You think this culture is in decay now? You think your nation is in trouble now? Habakkuk, you know what you didn't even know? I've been in the process of answering your prayer for a long time. I just didn't let you know it, and the reason is two. Number one, if I told you what I was going to do and how I was going to answer your prayer, you wouldn't have believed it. And number two, you wouldn't have understood it. Because he says 6 words to Habakkuk that reminds us of the old saying, be careful what you pray for, you might just get it. And here's the 6 words. I am raising up the Babylonians. Now, this is so huge we got to plant here for a minute because that doesn't really speak to you, and I know it doesn't. So I'm going to explain why that's bad. That's just bad. Because God says basically, Habakkuk, you've been praying for deliverance for your nation, and I'm going to deliver them. Really? Yep. Into their worst nightmare. Oh yeah, I'm going to do it. Now I don't have time to unpack all these verses, but as you read down through this description of this nation, let me just put it this way. The Babylonians would make North Korea, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban look like Girl Scouts. Now Habakkuk is in a dilemma. He had reached a desperation point in his match with God. He says, okay, let me get this straight. Your answer to my prayer is you're going to raise up a nation more sinful than my nation. You're going to raise up a nation more wicked than my nation. You're going to raise up a nation more horrible than my nation and use that nation to destroy my nation. Now you're probably sitting there saying, man, I can relate to that. Okay, now you've honestly confronted God. Do it. Just God can handle it. God, I'm upset. God, I'm mad. I don't understand this, and I got to have a talk with you. But what do you do after that? Second step. Then you faithfully commend God. After you honestly confront God, then you faithfully commend God. Now look what Habakkuk does. He's at a crossroad. What's he going to do? He was so frustrated at one time that God had not listened to his prayer, that God was not answering his request. Now he's even more frustrated because what he's saying to God is, wrong answer. Wrong answer. That is not what I want. Can we go back? Can I have a do-over? Can I have a mulligan? This is not the direction I want you to go in. Anything but the Babylonians. Instead of giving Habakkuk what he wanted for his country, God says, I'm not going to give your country what you want. I'm going to give your country what I know they need. And Habakkuk didn't like the answer. So let me ask you a question. What do you do at that point? What do you do when you finally wake up and say, you know what? I think I know how you're answering this, and I don't like your answer. I think I see how you're working this out, and I don't like the way that you're working this out. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to check out? You're going to back out? You say, but what do you do after you talk it out and you're still ticked off? You talk it out and you're still not satisfied. Then you got to do what Habakkuk did. Now watch what he does. It's brilliant. He goes back to the basics. He goes back to the beginning. Matter of fact, he goes back to the one who was in the beginning. He goes back to God. Because here's the thing. This is big. If you don't listen to anything else I've said for the last 25 minutes, listen to this. Whenever you're wrestling with God, just always remember who you're wrestling with. That's huge. Just keep that in mind. That's what he had to do. So you've got to remind yourself who you're struggling with, who you're upset with, and remember what we said. When you don't understand what God is doing, remember who God is. That's exactly what Habakkuk does. So look what he says in verse 12. He says, O Lord, are you not from everlasting? Now here's what he basically said. He said, I forgot. You're eternal. You were around before I ever came into this world, and you'll be around a long time after I'm gone. As a matter of fact, you were around before there was a world. And you will be around when there is no more world. And you're eternally wise. You're not just a run-of-the-mill God. You are the everlasting God. You were here before all this came into being, and you will be here when all this has passed away. You're not limited by time. You're not limited by space. None of us ever saw the beginning of all this. Most of us will never really see the end of all this. God will see them both. And so from eternity past to eternity present to eternity future, God has never made a mistake, and God never will. He says, God, I got to remember, you are from eternity. Then look what he says in verse 12. My God, my Holy One, we will not die. He says, hey God, you're not only the eternal God, you're the holy God. You're the pure God. You are the perfect God. He is a perfectly holy being. So as Habakkuk is arguing with God and asking him in effect, are you really doing the right thing here? He's really reminding himself he's got to be doing the right thing. Evidently, this is the best way to handle this because He is perfectly holy. Because if God ever did wrong, He wouldn't be holy. And if God was not holy, He would no longer be God. And even God cannot compromise His own holiness. So He goes on to say this, verse 12. O Lord, You have appointed them to execute judgment. O rock, You have ordained them to punish. In other words, what He's saying is, God, You're not just eternally God. You're not just holy God. You're sovereign God. You're in control. The Babylonians think they're raising themselves up. They're not raising themselves up. You are raising them up. You're controlling history. You're controlling destiny. You control the world and everything and everyone that's in it. And even though Babylonians thought it was all because of their power, God raised them up. And more than that, though they didn't know it, God was saying, I'm going to raise you up, but I'm going to use you for my purpose. And I'm going to use you for my plan. And so for at least a moment, it kind of all comes together for Habakkuk. Because Habakkuk is in the same position some of you are in right now, sitting here listening to this message. I don't understand what God's up to in my life. I just don't get it. And based on what I'm seeing, I just can't believe this is the way that God is choosing to work in my life. But Habakkuk finally got it. He says, look, if God is eternally wise, He has a plan. And if God has a plan, that plan will work. And that plan will work for what is best for me, and that plan will work for His glory. Because if God is perfectly holy, then whatever the outcome of my situation, it cannot be evil, it has to be good. It cannot possibly be the wrong thing, it has to be the right thing. If God is sovereign and God is all-powerful, what is happening is not by chance, it's not bad luck. God is in control, He knows what He's doing, He knows why He's doing it, He knows how He's doing it, and if I were God, now I get it, I'd do exactly the same thing. And that's when you start putting it all in perspective. So, I want you to write down 3 things. We'll finish. Number 1, when I don't think God is listening, He is. You think He's deaf, you think He's asleep, you think He doesn't care. He's not, He does. When I don't think God is listening, He is. Number 2, when I don't think God has a plan, He does. There's no renegade molecule out there on its own in the universe. Everything's going according to plan. Everything's on His perfect time. Nothing's out of whack. Every puzzle's fitting. Every piece of the puzzle's fitting. And number 3, when I think things are out of control, they're not. They're not. And when your faith is on the ropes and you're wrestling with God and things just don't make sense and you can't believe that God is involved in the way things are turning out in your life, and you ask yourself this question, why did this happen to me? Why this disaster? Why this tragedy? Why this difficulty? You just remember something. Sometimes it may be because God is trying to miraculously deliver you. Sometimes it may be that God is correctingly punishing you. Sometimes it may be that God's trying to drive you to your knees and bring repentance to you and get you to pray to Him. Sometimes it may be to teach you patience. Sometimes it may be to develop your character. Sometimes it may be to get your eyes off of earth and get your eyes on eternity. Sometimes it may be for all of the above, but the point is there's always a reason, always, and God has it. You may not understand it, you may not get it, you don't have to. And so this is what I want to wrap up with. So you're sitting there right now and you're saying, I'm still not buying it. You're telling me that God is all good and you're telling me that God is all powerful. And yet this world is in the unbelievable scumbag mess that it's in, and you expect me to hold those 2 things together? That I just want to draw one last piece of evidence and I'm done. If you're still not convinced that God can take the greatest evil and turn it into the greatest good, if you're still not convinced that God can take the greatest injustice to bring about the greatest justice, then I want to remind you of something that if only Habakkuk could have seen, maybe he could have reduced his book down to a single verse. And that is the cross of Jesus Christ. Because I want to take you back to when Jesus was hanging on that cross, stark naked, with His own urine and His own feces dropping to the ground, in the most excruciating, agonizing, humiliating position a human being could ever be in. And His mother was standing there, and Mary was standing there, Magdalene was standing there, And a couple of disciples were standing there. And they were shaking their fist in the face of God. What are you doing? Why are you letting this happen? You could have stopped this. This man's never done one thing wrong to anybody. He had us convinced he was the Messiah. We even heard you say yourself, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And you give him this? You give us this? We gave 3 years of our lives. We walked away from our business. We walked away from our family. We walked away from our friends for this. That's the best you can do. And they went back to their homes that night and they got in bed that night asking 2 questions. Why does God? And why doesn't God? And their faith was on the ropes. And it was on the ropes Friday night. And it was on the ropes all day Saturday. And it was on the ropes Saturday night until Sunday morning. And they walked to a tomb where the stone had been rolled away. And the light came on. Even when we thought God wasn't listening, He was. Even when we thought He doesn't have a plan, He did. Even when we thought things were out of control, they weren't. And God took the greatest evil the world has ever seen. And has turned it into the greatest good. Let's pray together.
Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." We may condone, He will condemn. We may contradict, He will confirm. Need some gentle persuasion? Here's our number. Whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And in that we can be confident. When every day seems like 12 rounds with the heavyweight champion of the world, you need help. Well, help is on the way. New from Touching Lives, On the Ropes. 3 searing messages declaring God cares, has a plan, and is always in control. CDs $15, DVDs $25 at touchinglives.org. If you're down for the count, your faith in doubt, get on your feet. There's no defeat when God makes your life a knockout. Now, a quick look at the next Touching Lives.
Delay is not denial. It's not denial. God says, and what God was saying to Habakkuk was, God, Habakkuk, all this time you were praying, you prayed for weeks and I didn't say anything, and you prayed for months and I didn't say anything, and you prayed for years and I didn't say anything. And what you didn't understand, Habakkuk, was this: I do things my way, and I also do them in my time. I won't be pushed, I won't be shoved, I won't be hurried, and I won't be bullied.
At Touching Lives, there's no panic button. We hit the hot button, and you answer with fervent prayers and financial support. We count on you so we can teach others who count on us that together we all can count on God.
Hope and encouragement.